Yeah. That's good. That's good. Hey, welcome everyone. Great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. Just a couple of months ago, my mother-in-law, Hazel, celebrated her 80th birthday. And as part of her celebrations, she and a friend decided to go to Norway to do a bit of exploring in Norway. So when I heard that, I thought, well, what I could do is I could just help out with the trips to and from the airport. And so I said to Hazel, look, I'm happy to take you and to pick you up. And so she gave me the dates, and I put the date of taking them to the airport. And I forgot to put the date in for picking her up afterwards. And so there was just a blank in my diary, and I had a phone call from a funeral director asking if I would take a funeral. So I looked in my diary, it was clear, so I said yes to the funeral. And then after Hazel had gone on holiday, that was that question, when am I supposed to be picking her up? And I had that sinking feeling inside of, oh no, I've double booked myself. I checked my diary, and sure enough, at the time that I was supposed to be picking Hazel up from the airport, I was going to be taking a funeral. So I thought, well, I could leave her there. It's my mother-in-law. But no, I didn't. No, I didn't at all. No. And so I spoke to Sarah, and I said, Sarah, look, I'm really sorry. I've double booked. Is there any chance that you could do the airport run? And Sarah said, yes, that was fine. But for Sarah and I, whenever we go on long journeys, I tend to do all of the driving. And so Sarah rarely does long distances. So it was a long while ago when she last did a kind of an airport run. So she was a little bit nervous. But on the day just before I was going out in order to take the funeral, she asked me what time was the arrival and the airport. And so I told her. And Sarah got into the car. She had a really smooth drive all the way to Gatwick. She was able to park the car. She went in and was waiting. But there was no Hazel arriving or her friend. And she was a little bit confused. And then she realized that I'd told her the wrong airport. That actually she should have been at Heathrow and not at Gatwick. I mean, it's a small mistake. I mean, they're both airports, aren't they? But, and so... Oh, no. So she messaged me, and I waited a while before responding because I was at a funeral, so obviously I couldn't. And Sarah rang her mum and says, well, what do you want me to do? Because there she was in Costa at Heathrow. And so they said, look, we're happy to wait if you're happy to drive across. So Sarah got back into the car, and she went to make her way from Gatwick to Heathrow and discovered that the M25 was closed because there was an accident. And so her sat-nav showed a very alternative route, which was going through the country lanes of Surrey. And Sarah said that at one point, it was just this single track. There was no white lines or anything, and other cars who had obviously been kind of directed that way through their sat-nav, they'd pulled over thinking, this cannot be right. But Sarah eventually was able to pick up her mum, and 8 hours of driving, she arrived home. Now, to say that I was a little nervous at that point would be kind of a small understatement. So kind of heading into the house just to see kind of what mood Sarah was in. Actually, she was incredible. Do you know what she said to me? She said, I forgive you totally. I totally forgive you, and I'm totally going to tell everyone. Yes. Sarah's journey got complicated and confusing, but she had real confidence in her sat-nav to be able to get her where she needed to be. You know, when it comes to life, trying to find the way through life is also complicated and confusing. You know, we're all looking for trustworthy guidance. Sarah will never listen to me again. My guidance is just not good. But we're all looking for guidance in life. And in fact, there is no shortage of guidance in life. You go onto the internet, you can work out how to live a good life in so many different ways. And so we have to work out who it is that we should be listening to, who is it should be bringing direction. So this series that we're looking at over the next 6 weeks is called The Good Life. And whether we're someone who would say that we have a faith in Jesus, or whether we say that we'd still be exploring, we're a bit curious, but we're not quite sure what we believe. I think something that we all have in common is that all of us are wanting to live the good life. We're wanting to find a better life to live. It's out there somewhere, but how do we know how to find it? And so what happens is that we're not actually quite sure how to define the good life. And so we head down all sorts of roads trying to find it. Here we go. Look, I've just put up some of these roads that I think many people will try to discover where the good life is. So some would take the popular road. And to say, if I can have loads of friends on Facebook, loads of followers on Insta, if I can have loads of likes, if I can have friends, if I can go into a place and people go, hi, great to see you, that's going to be the good life. If I can make myself popular, it's the popular road. There's the wealthy road. All of us know that money won't make us happy. We all know that, but we're willing to give it a try though, aren't we? Because the idea of having a lot more money, honestly, that does sound appealing. So we'll take the wealthy road. There's the successful road. If I can make my business really, really work, then life's going to be happy. If I'm going to have a successful relationship, then life is going to be good. There's the independent road. I don't need anyone else. I'm just going to make my decisions. I'll live by them. I'm just going to do it my way. There's the busy road. There's the pleasure road. The pleasure road, which is, I just want to enjoy myself. There's the altruistic road, that I'm going to give myself to serving other people. I'm going to make some self-sacrifices. That way, I must be able to find the good life. Or there's the religious road. The religious road would say that if I can make God please, if I can keep the rules, then, well, to be honest, that must lead to the good life. How many of those roads, just have a look, how many of those roads are you on at the moment? Because I think it's not surprising that actually when you look down that list, there might be 2 or 3 that you think, actually, no, that's what I'm striving for. That's the road that I'm on. I still look at that first one for me. I so want to be liked. I think if I could be liked by everyone, then I've found the good life. And that's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Which road? Which road would you identify best with there? The reason that they're there is because they are so popular. They're appealing. Those roads are really wide. They're broad. And there are loads of people on those roads. Loads. So when Jesus came and he started talking about life and he started talking about the good life, well, he introduces people to the idea of a very different kind of road. It's not an appealing road. It's this. It's the narrow road. As soon as you hear that word narrow, straight away it feels very restrictive, doesn't it? It feels very confined. It feels quite negative. But the road that Jesus spoke about is the road that leads to the good life. And we find it in Matthew's account of Jesus' life. Now, Matthew was a disciple of Jesus. He'd originally been a tax collector. No one liked tax collectors, but Jesus once again stepped towards him and says, Matthew, why don't you come and follow me? And Matthew gave 3 years of his life of following Jesus, and then ultimately gave his life a number of years later. So this is what he recorded Jesus saying. Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction and disappointment and pain and hurt, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. Now, the context of what Jesus was saying here would be something very, very familiar. Rome had overthrown the rulers of Israel. And so Rome, in order to be able to get their troops to be able to get around really easily, the Romans were known for building big roads. You still find Roman roads here in the UK, and they're normally very, very straight. And so within Israel, Israel's landscape will have been changed by the Romans in order to create these wide roads for their troops to be able to make their way around. And Jesus is saying there's a wide road, but there's a wide road that can lead to disaster. But there's a narrow road. It's harder to find. It's harder to travel down. In fact, you'll probably have to slow down on the narrow road. But it's that road that leads to life. So with that kind of intro, I want to be able, for us over these next number of weeks, to have a look at what Jesus had to say about living the good life. And he does it in what's known as probably one of the most powerful, one of the most impactful sermons that have ever been given. It's known as the Sermon on the Mount. Now, it's possible that actually this is a collection of Jesus' teaching, all brought into one. It might well have been that, a bit like kind of the top 10 of Jesus' best teaching. It could be like it could be referred to as the best TED talk ever given, because it's only about 2,000 words. You know, if you were to ask people in Debenham or in Stowmarket or Ipswich or wherever it is that we live, and we were just to go up to them and say, have you heard of the phrase, the salt of the earth? Have you heard of the phrase, an eye for an eye, or turn the other cheek? Do you know what? Loads of people would say, yeah, of course we know that. If you were to say, where does that come from? You would get a glazed expression over people's faces because they've heard the phrases, but they don't know where it's from. Well, those phrases come from the greatest sermon ever told. They're from the Sermon on the Mount. And the Sermon on the Mount has impacted people's lives in incredible ways. I want to show you a very bearded man. Here we go. Now then, this guy here is Leo Tolstoy. Leo Tolstoy is a Russian author. He wrote the book War and Peace. How many people have heard of War and Peace? Thank you. How many people have read War and Peace? One. Thank you. Right, okay, then that's normally the case. We know about it, but we've never read it. I think it's fairly heavy from what I gather. Anyway, Tolstoy, he recorded the fact that he had read the Sermon on the Mount, and this is what he said. He said that it had brought him out of despair and suicidal thoughts. These 3 chapters have had a huge impact on this man. So much so that near the end of his life, as he was writing letters, the last letter that he wrote, other than to family, was to a young Indian activist. And in his letter, he referred to the teaching within the Sermon on the Mount, speaking about a non-violent resistance to evil. And this was the guy that he wrote to, Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi had read the Sermon on the Mount, and he wrote to a young African-American activist called Martin Luther King. The Sermon on the Mount has affected and transformed poets and writers and politicians and activists and everyday people like you and me. It's brought about a transformation influencing millions of people. Now, this Good Life series that we are starting today, so this is kind of an introduction, is based on a series done by my friend called Leon Evans, who is from Life Central Church in Halesowen. And it's also built around and worked around a book called The Narrow Path, written by a guy called Rich Valodas. He leads a church in New York in the States. And it's a brilliant book taking you through step by step the Sermon on the Mount. I would highly recommend it to you. If you want to know what the good life is, we need to read the Sermon on the Mount, because this is the life that God invites you and me to live. And honestly, my hope and prayer over these next few weeks is that these words of Jesus will impact our lives. It will start to shape who we are, and it will begin to affect our thoughts and our decisions as we go through life, as we shape towards going along the narrow road. It's going to be challenging because Jesus says some really, really hard stuff in this. Really hard stuff. He says this, that if your eye causes you to sin, you're to gouge it out. Now, we have an info point over here, and if anyone's struggling with that, we can certainly sort that for you. We're happy we've got some pliers. No. Do Jesus said, we're to love our enemy. We're to love our enemy. We're to forgive. I tell you, some of the things which Jesus speaks about are really, really tough. There's an author a number of years ago called G.K. Chesterton. Some of you will have heard of him. And he said this: the Christian ideal has not been tried and found wanting. It's been found difficult and left untried. And I thought, that is so profound. So it's not that it's been tried and found wanting. No, it's been so difficult that people can't try it. So what does Jesus say? Well, let's go back over that verse again. What does the verse say? The verse says, enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life. I always thought, growing up, because I'm fairly familiar with this Sermon on the Mount, because I've read it a number of times, I always thought that was referring to those who go to heaven and those who don't. If you get onto the narrow road, you'll go to heaven. If you're on the broad road, you'll go to hell. And that's what I grew up kind of believing. But that's actually not what Jesus is saying. That's not the context for what Jesus is saying here. What Jesus is saying here is this, is that there is a narrow road that where Jesus wants to form our lives to become like him, to become the people that he wants us to be. And he says that it's a hard road and only a few find it. Now, of course, everyone needs to make a decision, needs to make a choice about who Jesus is, whether he's died for us and risen again. We all need to make that choice. But that's not what Jesus is referring to here. He's saying that there is a way of living our Christian life which can be shaped by him. So let's go to see, how does the Sermon on the Mount start? This is how it starts. It says, one day, as he saw the crowds gathering, Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down. Now, Jesus didn't sit down because, boy, that was hard work climbing up there. Now, that's what I would do, but that's not what was happening here. For Jesus to sit down as he starts to teach was a sign that what he was going to say was really, really important. So if you go to a wedding here in this country, everyone is sitting down, and as soon as the master of ceremony stands up, everyone looks up at the top table, and then they invite the father of the bride, they invite the bridegroom to speak, and the best man. And what do? They always stand up while everyone else is sitting. Why? Because they've got something important to say. In Jewish culture, it's the other way round. So when the rabbi would sit down, everyone listened in because they knew he had something important to say. So his disciples gathered around him and he began to teach them. Now, I've been to that mountainside. Back in 2019, a group of us, some from the Forge and from other churches, we went out to the Holy Land. And it is this beautiful hillside, and it's overlooking Lake Galilee. It was such a lovely and beautiful setting. And so Jesus is sitting, the crowds and the people and his disciples are listening. And then he starts with these words. He says, God blesses those. That word bless or blesses or blessed is not a word that we use very much. I mean, sometimes you'll hear it, people on telly, like, my life is pretty blessed, man, Sometimes it's used that way. If someone sneezes, what do you say? Bless you, absolutely, yeah. So it is used, but we don't really kind of use the full meaning of the word. The word is makarios, which actually means happy, but not a happiness that is built on nice happenings. It's actually a happiness that kind of revolves around a contentment of knowing that we are loved by God and have God's presence with us. It's a window into the life that God calls us to. You don't find this on any other road. So who's blessed? God blesses those. Well, normally it's the fortunate, it's the wealthy, it's the popular, it's the happy. And what Jesus does is he completely flips the script, because this is what he goes on to say. And if you haven't come across this before, this might be puzzling, so hopefully we can just explore it for a few minutes. He says this: God blesses those who are poor and realize their need for him, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. That's not a great start, is it? Blessed are those who are poor. That can't be right. But what Jesus is saying is that to be spiritually poor means that we acknowledge our profound need for God's love and for God's presence in our lives. What he's saying is, blessed are those who know they're inadequate, know they can't do it on their own. Blessed are those people, because it's those who are aware of their own need are the ones who are drawn into the blessing and favor of God. Do you know what? If you want to experience, if you want to understand why we do the songs that we do, which keep singing about Jesus, if you want to understand why faith is so important, the only way that you will really do that, and only way that you'll experience the good life, is if we're willing to admit that we can't do it alone. That actually we need help, we need God. We will never experience the good life if we think that we're fine and that we don't need him. You see, we're blessed not when we get something, but when we are something. And that are something is to say that I'm not good enough. I can't do it on my own. That's the only condition required to inherit the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven is theirs. The only way is to recognize that apart from Jesus, I can do nothing. If you're curious, if you're someone here who's still exploring faith, just be open for the time being. Be open to the fact that maybe life isn't just meant to be done by yourself, and that maybe God is someone who can bring the meaning and purpose that you're desperately looking for. Blessed are those who are poor. Then he goes on to say this: blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. He's saying being aware of our grief and loss and then carrying it to the one who can bring comfort. Well, they're the blessed ones. You know, when we mourn, we often think of mourning when it comes to a funeral, don't we? You know, when someone has died and we have that sense of loss, but loss can be all kinds of things. We can lose the dream that we had in life. We can lose our reputation. We can lose relationships. There are all kinds of losses that we experience. And Jesus is saying that if you have lost something and that you come to me, you are blessed because you will find comfort. Blessed are those who are humble, for they will inherit the whole earth. There's another word that some of the translations use, which is called meek. The meek will inherit the earth. Again, some people will have heard that phrase. And the word meek isn't weak. The word meek means to have power, but bringing it under control. So often the example that people will use is like if you have a horse, a wild horse, one of the roles of the trainer is to bring the power of that horse, which is immense, under control. So they speak about breaking a horse. So the horse still has the power, but it's now under control. I think we are almost trained through media and through many other ways that actually to get on in life, we have to be forceful, we have to push, we have to be aggressive, we have to fight, we have to do all that we can to push ourselves forward. Leadership is shown like that in our country and around the world today. It's aggressive, isn't it? It's horrible. When you watch the news and you see some of the leaders within the world today speaking so angrily, so argumentatively, it's dominating, it's polarizing, it creates fear. I mean, Charlie Kirk, who was shot this last week, horrendous situation. But if you go onto social media, it's horrible. From both the politically left and the political right side, it is just gross. It is so aggressive and angry. And Jesus says, no, that's not the way to find blessing. That's not the way to the good life. It's humility, it's gentleness, it's meekness, because those things will heal the world. So he calls us to a different road. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice, for they will be satisfied. Again, Jesus is flipping the script here. There was very little mercy in Jesus' day. It was meanness, not mercy. So if you were sick, bad luck. If you were poor, off you go. If you're a sinner, well, let's pick up some stones because we might just throw them at you. That was the environment in which Jesus was living. And Jesus brought a completely different way to living because he looked at the poor and he reached out to them. He looked at the sick and he healed them. And for those who were sinners, whose heads were down, who feared for their lives, Jesus put his arm around them and said, "You're forgiven. You're forgiven." Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice will be satisfied. You know, Jesus is saying there is hope. Even if you experience injustice, if you're treated badly, if people make up stuff about you and accused falsely, he says, trust me, I've got this. There is hope. You are blessed because one day justice will be restored and you will be rewarded. This carries for people who speak up for those who have no voice, for those who speak up for those people who are basically human slaves, human trafficking. When we stand up for the marginalized, Jesus is saying, if you're hungry and thirsty for that, that's good, because you will see justice one day. Blessed are those who are merciful. Blessed are those whose hearts are pure, for they will see God. This isn't about having a perfect heart. This is having a heart towards God. You know, if you have a little a niece or a granddaughter or a grandson, and you've given them a present, and you get given a letter, and the parent says, look, I didn't ask them to write this, they've just written this for you. And you open it up and it says, dear so-and-so, thank you for my present. But you see that the D's and the B's are the wrong way round. That the writing slopes all the way down on the page and they've misspelt things. And you look at that and there's two things you can do. You can either say, who teaches this child? What are they doing? No, you don't. You never take that option. You always look and you think, that is wonderful. That is so lovely. And you love them all the more. Why? Because you know the heart behind the letter. God is saying, he sees our heart. He knows that we won't always get it right, but he sees our heart. And he knows when our heart is pure towards him. God blesses those who work for peace. There are peacemakers and there are peacekeepers. A peacekeeper avoids issues to try and keep the peace. And whereas that looks quite good on the outside, what normally happens is that things fester and then it blows up and it all goes wrong. Jesus isn't talking about peacekeepers, he's talking about peacemakers, people who will work for peace. And sometimes that means dragging up stuff which isn't very nice. It can cause conflict, but ultimately will lead to a greater peace. Blessed are the peacemakers, or those who work for peace, for they will be called children of God, because God wants to work peace in our lives. And then this last one, blessed are those who are persecuted for doing right, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. God blesses you when people mock you and persecute you and lie about you and say all sorts of evil things against you because you're my followers. Be happy, be very glad, for a great reward awaits you in heaven. And remember, the ancient prophets were persecuted in the same way. Jesus knew that for people to follow him, it was going to bring opposition. It was going to be costly. 11 of the 12 disciples all had their lives ended early because they chose to follow Jesus and preach Jesus. And there is no record of any of them complaining. Why? Because they were blessed. They knew that God was with them, they knew that God's love was for them, and they knew that ultimately what their destiny would be. Can I just say, it's costly to follow Jesus. It's costly to go down the narrow road. We'll be misunderstood, we'll be treated differently. We're to expect it. But let's make sure that if we get persecuted, if we get a hard time, it's because we follow Jesus, not because we're idiots. Okay? Here we go. This is one of the things which Leon Evans said in his series, which I loved. If people don't like you, if people don't like you because of Jesus, that's okay. But if people don't like Jesus because of you, that's not okay. In other words, when we're grumpy, when we're negative, when we're demanding, when we're entitled, when we're pushy, when we're insensitive, when we try and force things into conversations, that's just being stupid. Honestly, if you get a hard time, you deserve it. I deserve it. Because that's not what Jesus is speaking about. It's standing up for truth and what's right. And when we do that, we'll face a hard time. Jesus is saying all of this because he wants to break this myth that the good life is only for good people. It's only for the privileged. It's only for the VIPs. It's only for the CEOs, the ripped, the fit. This is not it. It is reserved for anyone who welcomes God into their lives. So as we go through this series, I want two things really for you to consider. The first one is to engage. Would you make a commitment over these next 6 weeks to either be here if you're able to be here, or if you can't, to catch up and watch online as we work through the Sermon on the Mount? You can choose to buy this little book if you want to, The Narrow Path, and you can read this over the next few weeks to help you engage in what Jesus has to say. There are Bible plans around the Sermon on the Mount. So just look to engage, look to be a part of this over these next 6 weeks, and engage by saying, God, if I'm on the wrong road, if I'm traveling down a road which it might be wide and might be easy, but it's not the road you want, then would you speak to me over this week? And secondly, examine. Just stop and think, which road am I on? Am I going after Jesus forming me into the person that he wants me to be, or am I going to be happy through stuff? Happy through earning, happy through success? And where does a shift in my thinking and actions need to happen for Jesus to form the person that he wants me to be? Can I ask, as the band are going to sing us, going to lead us in a song, can I just ask, before we do that, would you mind just closing your eyes? I know it might feel just a little bit awkward, but it's just to be able to focus, because I want you to listen to a modern retelling of the Beatitudes, because I believe this can bring so much hope to each one of us. Take a listen. You're blessed when you hit rock bottom, because then you can rely on God to go to work for you. You're blessed when you mourn. That means you feel compassion and empathy for others, and you begin to understand that we are all one. You're blessed when you're humble and authentic. That's worth way more than fleeting power and material possessions. You're blessed when you hunger and thirst after spiritual things instead of worldly things. You will feel full instead of empty. You're blessed when you express kindness. You will receive kindness in return. You're blessed when you will allow God's presence and goodness to fill your mind, heart, and soul. And then you'll see God in the outside world. You're blessed if you live in peace and create peace. Then you will understand what it means to be a child of God. You're fulfilling God's dream for world peace. You're blessed when people make fun of you or ridicule you for my sake. That means that you've struck a nerve. Well done. Many of my followers have experienced this. You are in good company. And you're blessed if you are persecuted because of your relationship with God. God knows and sees everything. And God will reward you for your faithfulness. It's when the goodness of God fills our lives, no matter what our circumstances. That's the good life. That's when we feel secure. Because God is good even when life isn't. Let's stand, let's sing together.